Hey folks, welcome to an impromptu Passion for Sound audio review. And what I mean by impromptu is that I didn't plan to record this one today. I actually had something different planned to share with you today, but as things have happened, that didn't quite go according to plan, and so I've quickly reshuffled my schedule. I'm recording this in not quite my usual setup. As you'll see, I've got my microphone here instead of off camera. Hopefully that's not going to distract any of you too much, but on the other hand, hopefully it's going to provide even better sound quality. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is the DCA Stealths, or the Dan Clark Audio Stealths. Now, some of you might know that I actually reviewed these some time ago. I wasn't particularly impressed with them, so you might be wondering what I'm doing sharing a video on these again. And the answer is that I never felt quite comfortable with the results from my last review, and I had this inkling that they should have been better than what I was hearing. And so what I was able to do was arrange a different pair to be lent to me by the local distributor. So I want to say a huge thanks to Nigel from Advanced Audio for letting me borrow a pair of these, give them an extended listening test, really get to know them. And I also want to say a huge thanks to Jim the Coffee Guy, who lent me his original pair again. That was the first pair I reviewed, so I could compare the two and see if there was actually a difference between them. And sure enough, there was. And so this video is going to be fairly quick. I'm not going to go into depth again about the headphone. I would recommend you go and watch the first sections of my original review to get an understanding of what I think about the ergonomics, the accessories, the connection, the design, all of which I think is fantastic, by the way. What I want to focus on here is a correction to what I said in the original review about the sound quality of the Stealths. And the reason it needs a correction is not because I was wrong as such, so much as the fact that the headphones that I was loaned had an issue. Now that issue is going to be addressed at length in an interview that I had with Dan Clark from Dan Clark Audio about this and a number of other things. So I'm going to release that one very shortly after I release this video. Make sure you're subscribed if you want to see more discussion on this. But to give you a quick summary, what was going on according to Dan when they've received the headphones back and they've assessed them at Dan Clark Audio is that the pads somehow on Jim's original pair had been heavily worn. Now, I've spoken to Jim about this as well. He knows that they haven't been subjected to heat, excessive use, excessive humidity, anything like that in his possession, so we don't know where the problem came about. But according to what Dan found when they were able to measure Jim's pair of headphones, there was an issue where the pads had become too soft, so they were overly compressing, they were sort of getting squished in more than they should, maybe not quite that much, but you get the idea. And the result was that the sound changes within the ear cup, because think of the ear cup as like a room around your ears, we were changing the dimensions of that, according to what Dan's saying, and that altered the tonality, which altered my perception of the soundstage, and also changed how the sound was coming across. I described in my original review that the sound came across a bit forceful, the sort of lower mids were just a bit too thick, but not in the sense that it was a rich, thick sounding headphone. It was just kind of very one-dimensional, and it surprised me based on everything else I'd heard and read about them. And so when I got this new pair that's sitting here in front of me today, my experience with those was vastly different. And it's not to say that I now think they're the best headphone ever, but I do think they're excellent, and I want to explain to you what I think they're great for and what they're maybe not so good for. But I do want to stress that my original review in terms of the sound quality part of it is not something you should really take into account when deciding if you want these headphones. Now, obviously, I had no idea at the time that I was testing a faulty pair of headphones. I apologize that that's what happened, but there was no way for me to know. Now, with these in front of me, let me share with you my notes and thoughts about how the DCA Stealth actually sound when they're correct and working as they're meant to. Before I get to that though, I do want to cover off one more thing, and this will be addressed in the interview with Dan Clark. But I want to talk about the fact that if you're listening to me say that Jim's pair had an issue with the pads and it changed the sound, you might be thinking, hey, this is a $4,000 headphone and someone's received a pair that was faulty out of the box, what's going on? And we don't actually know the answer. Dan can't tell me exactly why the issue could have occurred. He talks in the interview about all different things that could affect the foam. But the good news is, and the thing I want to stress, is that all of these headphones do get tested with the pads on before they leave the factory. So the chances of you getting a pair coming out of DCA with the same issue that Jim's had are very, very, very small. And in fact, I'd go to say that having not heard anyone else describe the headphone quite as I did, it could just be a random one-off where there was a fault with that particular bit of foam. I'm not sure the exact causes, but the point that I want to stress here is that you shouldn't avoid buying a pair of these if what I'm about to describe sounds good to you, because they are a wonderful sounding headphone. They're a great choice in a closed back, so long as you like the characteristics that I'm about to describe. Now, I've just fixed the lighting. Sorry if that was a bit full on my t-shirt to start with. As I said, I'm not in my normal setup today, so please forgive any slight irregularities in the presentation today. Hopefully it's actually still working well for you. Let me know what you think of it if you like it better in any ways. I'd be really interested to know, because I'm always looking to tweak and improve the filming setup. But now let's get into the sound quality of the DCA Stealths. when you get a pair that's right, which most of them, as I've already said, will be, what you're going to hear is a wonderful sounding closed back headphone that's very technical. And what I mean by that is it lets you focus in on textures, details, the clarity, the sense of space in the sound. It's a very technically capable headphone that's not without its enjoyment, but at the same time, it's not the pinnacle of enjoyment in closed backs for me either. And that's not a knock against it. It's a matter of putting it in perspective for what it does really well and maybe what it doesn't do so well when compared to others. And so with that in mind, I wanted to go straight into some comparisons to put the DCA Stealth up against some other excellent closebacks and give you a sense of where it sits in the scheme of things. I've got 2 tracks that I moved through here as I was doing some testing, and I've got a total of 3 headphones, being, of course, the DCA Stealths, and then also the ZMF Verite Closed, a wonderful closeback option, significantly cheaper than the Stealths, which may or may not be a good thing if it doesn't perform as well, of course. And then also the Sennheiser HD820, another headphone which is cheaper than the DCA Stealth, but also one that performs very well. And the first track that I landed on for some of this testing, and I've listened to all of these extensively, so this is not the only tracks I've tried, but the one that I made my notes on to start with was Radio City Serenade by Mark Knopfler. On this track, the Stealth presents this wonderful sense of space. This track opens with a piano playing solo, and you can really hear the room that the piano is being played with, and that's one of the strengths from the Stealths. They consistently deliver an excellent sense of the size and the shape of the soundstage. As the instrumentation in this track gets expanded, there's a trumpet which is incredibly well focused in the mix. When Mark Knopfler's guitar comes in, it's very clear, very articulate. There's lots of texture and clarity from that guitar. And ultimately, the biggest standout for me with the Stealths, and this is true across the board for them, is that they do separation and focus of images extremely well. So if you do like to get into the details, if you like to hear pinpoint placement of everything, that's where they really shine. It's where Jim's original pair didn't shine, and that's what shocked me. But what you can expect to hear if you buy a pair is a headphone which is technically very, very strong, particularly in that imaging and focus type space. One thing I should point out though, is that when Mark Knopfler's vocal came in when he started singing in this track, what I noticed is something that the Stealths do tend to do that I'm not necessarily a fan of, and that is they tend to focus you a lot on the textures and details rather than the harmonic richness and fullness of the sound. And that's going to be partly because they're a closeback, and it's always going to be a challenge to tune a closeback effectively because you're going to have extra resonances and reflections inside the cups. And so often what you'll find is that there's all kinds of lumpy and bumpy bass frequencies and things being cut, things being boosted to try to get the right sound without getting boominess or bloated sound from a closed-back headphone. And indeed, I think in the case of the Stealths, for a pure enjoyment, for a pure kind of emotional connection to the music, it's probably gone a little bit too far for me with the Stealths. It's just a little bit leaner than I'd like from that pure enjoyment and engagement point of view. But it's not to say they're not an enjoyable headphone. I just want to put it into context here that it's a headphone that I think is excellent. It's a headphone that I've considered buying. The only reason I haven't bought it is because the Expanse came out. But other than that, it was definitely a headphone that was on my wish list, and it just didn't quite get there because the Expanse is so much better, and I've got a review of the Expanse coming soon. That was actually what was meant to be coming today, but I'll explain later why that didn't happen. So for now, what I want to say about the Stealth is it's extremely capable technically, it's enjoyable without being right up the top of the most enjoyable listens I've tried in a closed back. And in terms of things like imaging focus, sound separation, sense of soundstage space within a closed back, I don't think it can beat it. Not from what I've heard anyway. And keep in mind that I haven't yet heard the Focal Stellia. I believe that could be an excellent option too, but I haven't yet had a chance to try it. So for now, let's just say the Stealth is excellent technically. It doesn't quite win me over emotionally. And the reason I say that is because the other headphone that I tried on Radio City Serenade was the ZMF Verite Closed. Now immediately it became clear to me that the Verite Closed is not reaching the same levels of detail, clarity, space, and imaging focus that the Stealth does. The Stealth has a clear edge there and a significant edge, which is not to say that the VC is a bad headphone, VC being Verite Closed. It's just giving you different strengths. And what I specifically noticed was that there was a sense of richness and fullness to the sound from the Verite Closed that did get me more engaged in the music. I actually found that Mark Knopfler's vocals from the Verite Closed sounded more natural to me. They had a bit more body and a bit more presence, and that to me is where the Stealth is lacking a little bit. And so whilst the sounds are still quite well articulated, there's a good sense of clarity in general from the Verite Closed, it doesn't match the Stealth. And so what I want to start doing here is just to clarify the fact that for me, the Stealth is the headphone you would go for if you want absolute technical accuracy from a detail retrieval, spacing, imaging, soundstage size point of view. But if you're looking for tonal accuracy and enjoyment and engagement, then something like the Verite Closed could be the better choice. But then knowing that I also had the highly engineered Sennheiser HD820 here, the question then was, is that even more technical again, and where does it sit compared to the Verite Closed and the DCA Stealth? And so I fired up Captivation by Kerem Gorsev. This is a really sweeping jazz and orchestral track, and I went through all three headphones this time, because I wanted to keep the VC in the mix as kind of one end of the scale, which is that more rich, lush, engaging sound that's still detailed and textured, but it's at the other end of the spectrum for me from the DCA Stealth, where the DCA Stealth is that technical, less emotionally engaging, less rich sound. And what I heard again was that the Verite Closed delivered an excellent sound. It was smooth, it was rich, it was giving me that full sense of body from the orchestra and the piano, but it was also giving me a lovely sense of articulation and percussion on the piano keys. And so again, it reminded me just how good the Verite Closed is before I swung across to the Stealths and heard what they were capable of, which was immediately giving me that greater sense of space again. The orchestra and the piano were more spaced apart. I could hear the full size of the orchestra now in a way that I couldn't hear as well from the Verites. And so again, the technicalities of the mix were clearer from the Stealth. But it was coming at the expense of that lushness and richness which this track absolutely should have. And so at this point it's really clear, and you've probably gathered this already, that you're trading space and imaging focus for lushness, richness and engagement. And the VC is not a thick, kind of muddy headphone, but it's got body to it, it's got presence and warmth to it. And so the starting point was this trade-off between the two, and then going over to the HD820, it kind of sits somewhere in the middle. I feel like the sense of space from the HD820 is better than it is from the Verite Closed, but it's not as strong as the DCA Stealth. At the same time, I also feel like the tonality from the 820 isn't quite as strong as the Verite Closed either. I'm going to review the 820 on its own soon, so I'm going to get to all the details there, but I'm just going to say for now that for me, there's a slightly boxy character to the upper bass or the lower mid-range that just throws the tonality off. On some tracks it's fine, you don't even hear it. On other tracks it just comes forward a bit and makes things sound a little bit unnatural. And so in that respect, I'd say that you've got three excellent closed-back headphones here with three very different purposes. Or maybe not purposes, but preferences. You've got the Verite Closed for pure enjoyment and engagement, but you are losing out on some of the technicalities. You've got the DCA Stealths at the other end, which are just phenomenal technically, and they're still a very, very good listen, but they're not quite as emotionally engaging as something like the Verites. And then sitting somewhere in between is the HD820, an excellent headphone. It's got a better tonal balance, I think, in terms of the fullness of the sound than the DCA Stealth. It's not quite as technical as the DCA Stealth, but in that sense it's better than the VC. And then you do have to put up with, in the middle there, a little bit of tonal inaccuracy in terms of that slightly strange upper bass, lower mids. And so ultimately what I would say is we've got three excellent headphones here, but coming back around to the focus of this review being the DCA Stealth, my time with the Stealths here has really shown me that they're an absolutely fantastic headphone, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to try them again. It's definitely a shame that the initial pair I had this issue. Again, it's hard to know exactly how it was caused, but the good news is that it's very unlikely to happen to you if you buy a pair. And therefore what I would say is that if you're thinking about buying a pair, do so in confidence, knowing that you're buying one of the best, if not the best closed-back headphone on the planet. I can't think of another closed-back that manages to balance a level of enjoyment, which yes, it's not as emotionally engaging as the VC, but it's still very enjoyable for extended listens. I've used it heaps for everything from editing to video watching to just pure musical enjoyment, and it's absolutely fantastic in that sense. So if you are thinking about buying a pair of Stealths, do so with confidence. I definitely do recommend them, and if I was in the market for a closed-back pair of headphones, this would absolutely be the top of my list. So yes, even though I've said that I like the VCs, which are on loan to me from ZMF, even though I like the sound of the ZMS from an emotional point of view, I think the comfort, the ergonomics, the build quality, the ZMS are great too, but these are exceptional. Everything about these, the fact that they're compact, they fold up, they isolate well, they're super comfortable, the fact that they're technically so strong, and then also they're still enjoyable, even if not absolutely the most enjoyable, just makes them a total winner for me. Do keep in mind they're not the easiest thing to drive. You do need an amplifier with a fair bit of power for these. They're not quite Susvara level, but they are getting close. But if you can feed them from a quality source with enough power that you're not pushing your amp beyond its comfort zone and into a level of distortion and that harsher sound that you get, then I think the DCA Stealths are an absolute winner. And so again, apologies that my first review of these wasn't able to capture them in their correct state. I also want to say a huge thanks again to Jim, because he's been able to provide me the initial loan. He then gave me the same headphones back for the second loan that allowed me to see what the issues were that were going on here. And the end result is that I can now correct the original review and go back on what I said originally. I think in the original review I said something like, if this is accuracy, I don't want it, and instead say that if this is accuracy and what I'm hearing now is, it's absolutely fantastic. Tonality could be a little bit richer and warmer for my tastes, but that's going to be very preferential, and everything else about the Stealth is absolutely fantastic. So if you're in the market, don't hesitate, grab yourself a pair. As Dan talks about in his interview, if you do have any issues down the track with the pads, which he says should last 2 to 5 years thereabouts, if you do have any issues down the track, you can always change them over. They're cheap, they're easy. Dan talks about it in the video. So grab a pair if you've been thinking about it and enjoy one of the best, if not the best, closed-back headphone on the planet. And don't forget, if you've got any questions remaining about the Stealth, I've got the original review where everything except the sound impressions is still correct. So where I've talked about the ergonomics, the cable, the design, the foldability, all that's still true. So check out that one. That might answer some of the questions. Also, make sure you're subscribed so you see my interview with Dan Clark, which I'll drop in the next day or two. And of course, if you've still got questions after that, or if you just don't want to go and watch those other things, you can always drop me a comment down below. I do my best to answer all comments that come through, so let me know down there. It might take me a day or two to respond, but I always try to get back to people. For now though, I hope you found the video useful. I hope it's maybe explained some of the doubts and the sort of disagreements that happened between reviewers in the early days when I came out saying what I did, others were saying what they did. Hopefully this puts it into context as to why there was such a big difference. Sometimes it's because of preferences, this time it was actually because of a product issue. As always, if you found the video useful, helpful, interesting, I'd love it if you hit the like button, and consider subscribing and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. I've got some really great content coming. As I said before, the DCA Expanse is here now. I'm going to be putting that up against the Audeze LCD5, the Meza Elite, and the Susvara in a 4-way flagship shootout, so make sure you're subscribed and ring the notification bell too. For now though, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.